I was on a trip in the Bay of Biscay one time, and we were in a very bad storm, and our quarters is always forward in the forepeak, and our work is in the midships down below. And then when we come up midnight or any time off the watch, you get a watch in between the seas to get forward. And as I was running forward, a big sea came, the ship dived in and nearly swept me overboard. And I just managed to save myself by getting jammed in the railing. And when the sea went over, somebody else came to my rescue, pulled me out, and I got forward, and I was crook for a long time. But anyway, it was just a knock on my leg, and it started a diseased hip, and then that was the very start of it. Then I was on one ship where we went from, we were going into north of Japan to Moraran for bunker coal, and then from Moraran we were bound for Vancouver, which took another 30 days. Well, the skipper refused to take me to Vancouver, although there was no British consul in Moraran. There was just a British agent. And at last I was put ashore and collected my gear. I had a ear clipping machine and my razor and suit of clothes and a pair of shoes, and that was all. And no sooner I was ashore, they bundled me on another Japanese coastal boat, which went from Moraran to Hakodate. Hakodate is in the middle island in Japan, what they call Hakodate Straits, and the town of Hakodate itself is the northern side of the straits. It wasn't a passenger boat either, it was just a cargo coastal boat, and I was put amongst the sailors, who was all Japanese. I didn't have not a clue what they were talking about. The evening meal, they brought in a big bowl of rice, and each sailor or fireman, whoever they were, they come forward and get a small bowl of rice full and use these Japanese chopsticks. And they filled me a bowl of rice and some fish, and gave me a pair of chopsticks, but I could no more eat rice with chopsticks than to fly. So I had to eat the rice with my fingers. Anyway, finished the evening meal, went to sleep. I was laying on in a spare bunk, and next morning, early, we arrived in Hakodate. And they rang up the British consul in Hakodate, and his clerk came up to the ship and took me ashore, put me in a rickshaw, and took me to the hospital. And Japan was in the middle of winter. I landed up there at Moraran day after Christmas. And it's in the northern hemisphere, and Christmas time is just the coldest time. Japan looks similar to New Zealand, only New Zealand, the tips of the mountains are covered with snow. Japan was white right down to the sea level, where the sea was breaking ashore. Well, I got in the consul's office, and the consul's clerk wife was a Japanese lady. She cooked a couple of hard-boiled eggs and some bread. And I had a bit of breakfast, and then they after breakfast, took me to the hospital in the rickshaw. In the hospital, there was a big waiting room with an iron stove sitting in the center with iron flue running up about 8 feet and then right around the building and out in one corner out on the roof. That was the heating system. Well, it was very nice and hot, but my leg gave a lot of trouble. About 11 o'clock, the doctor came in with a wheelchair and some nurses and wheeled me in the operating theater. Well, that was all like a glass cage. I could see glass on top and glass all around me, and everywhere where I looked outside was snow. They put me on the operating table, undressed me, stripped everything off me, and I was shivering to jump out of my hide. And then they started to shave my leg and shave my body. My leg was just about falling off. I was about a month too late to go in the hospital. But before, somewhere about 10:30, one of the young doctors came to my head and offered me a little glass full of some red liquid. And he said in English to me, he said, "Drink this." So I put it to my mouth and tasted it. It tasted strong and sweet, and I swallowed it down quietly. And as soon as I swallowed it down, I could feel like fire going right down to my toes. And I stopped all the shivering, and there I was laying as quiet as a lamb on the chopping block, as you might say. And then about 11 o'clock, they put me a wire cage, something with a cotton wool in, and poured some liquid chloroform in. Oh, it was rotten to breathe in. But anyway, I sort of took a long breath, and after I took a long breath, I was off. I didn't feel anything more. From 11 o'clock up till 6 o'clock at night, I didn't know a thing. But on the ship where I was put ashore, the predominant language was Dutch. And there was a young Japanese, about 6'1" tall, and I was laying on his arms, and he was running up a flight of stairs. And I woke myself up swearing, and I was swearing in Dutch. I remember that as well as anything. And then he ran along the passage, then I went off again, and eventually he dropped me down on a long donkey's breakfast. That is a long sack full of straw. We were covered with blanket. Because in Japan there was no beds in the hospital, or no table. And they covered me up, put a big wire cage over my middle to save the blankets from getting on my leg. And I went off again. And I woke up next morning. They had arranged to send European food to me to the hospital from a European hotel. And there was a Japanese boy sitting cross-legged in front of me when I opened my eyes, and he had the brown box in front of me. He pulled the lid up, and out came a steaming hot aroma of fried onions and steak. If I wasn't sick, say so, I could have spewed my heart up. I would have liked in the ordinary time steak and onion. Could have ate with all my heart, but I was that full of chloroform from 11 o'clock till 6 o'clock at night that I was absolutely done coon. And they covered me up, and I went to sleep, and then during the night it was dark, and I come round again, and I was wishing I never come round, that I stopped to sleep. It was that sore. And I had a room to myself, and an old woman was with me in the room all the time, night and day. Well, she was about, well, I should say about 80 or 90. She had no teeth, one tooth in front, and that was painted black. She was sleeping on the floor, there on the other side of the fireplace. Fireplace was in the middle of the room, like a picture frame cut out of the floor and filled with ashes. And then they pile a heap of, wooden charcoal and put a match to it and blow a bit, and eventually it takes a nice red glow and it heats the room, and it's lovely to lay in front of it. After I got better. Well, then about 2 days after, the doctor came round and changed the bandage. Well, then I was in trouble again. I was in agonies to get the bandage up. They took my flesh off my leg from my knee up to my hip and scraped the bone and then put it together again and sewed it up. But eventually, I was about 3 months till springtime. I was laying in the bed and started to sit up eventually. And then after a while, I used to get up on my feet and walk round the room and look through the window. I was up on the second story in one corner of a building, and the building overlooked, through the end window, it overlooked a long little bay, and on the side window you looked straight over a cliff down into the water. And springtime, the herrings travel from north to south, something like they do in Scotland, and the fishermen, they go and meet the herring shoals, and there was a narrow entrance into this bay, and they put some fence with nets, some fence along there, so that the herrings, when they come from north, they hit the fence of netting, and they are directed through the opening into the bay, until the bay got full of herrings. That full that you could very near walk on top. All that bay was full, and all the herrings passed. They closed the entrance up, and there they were cleaning the herrings on the beach. I could see quite plain from my room, cleaning them, putting them in strings like 2 or 3 or 4 together, and put over a bar, and there they were drying them, and the interiors and the gills, and not the whole head they didn't pull up, just the gill, you know, what the fish breed with. And they were using these as a fuel, and boiling the rest down for oil, and filling up 44-gallon drums with this here fish oil. And when it came into midsummer, about May, oh, the place was stinking something shocking. You know, by that time all the herring internals started to rot and stink, and the burning of it, and it was something terrible. But anyway, after a while, I got better, that I was walking around, and I only had a suit of clothes with me that I possess, and my razor that I shaved with, and my ear clipping clippers, and I was walking around, and Japan was something like Russia in the olden times. There was a terrible lot of Japanese what was very poor, and the other half that were very rich. These rich Japanese companies, they owned these fishing fleets, and they were very interested in me, and they used to send the rickshaw out when I was able to get out with the doctor's permission. They took me to their houses and entertained me for the day, but neither in the rich people's houses or anywhere else there wasn't any furniture. There was only lots of pillows and the seagrass, thick mats on the floor, about 3 inches thick. When you walked along, you seemed to be sinking into them. And language was my problem. You see, when I was landed in Japan in the hospital, I couldn't speak a word of Japanese, and they couldn't speak no English, only the chief doctor and the consul. And the year that I was in Japan was 1909 and 1910. In January, I think somewhere 1910, the British consul's clerk came to me and said, "Our gracious King, King Edward VII has died." And he told me this in English. Oh, I said, what a pity. Anyway, while I was there in Japan in the hospital, by the time the springtime came, the snow disappeared, and the country was absolutely lovely. In New Zealand, you look on goss and stuff like that, goss and broom and what you call May, but in Japan it was all cherry blossoms. Cherry blossoms, white and pink, and oh, it was really beautiful. And I had a lovely time. All the summer. I was in Japan just about 12 months. About next spring, they took me from Hakodate to Yokohama, and I had to wait for a British ship by the name of Borneo, which was going from Japan to London. And when I went to Yokohama, by that time I could speak Japanese fairly good, because you had to. You see, you were put ashore amongst people that spoke nothing else but Japanese, and if you couldn't speak, you was absolutely a mug. By the time I was there, about 12 months, I could speak Japanese quite good. And while I was in that hospital in Hakodate, I had the best time in my life. I don't know whether it was curiosity of the people's part or what it was, but as soon as I was able to see, I was laying on this donkey breakfast, and a Japanese lady would come in, snow covered outside, and she'd get a basket full of fruit, Californian apples, nice and red, and bananas. And they didn't grow in Japan wintertime, they were imported from somewhere. And they come and drop in front of you on their knees and bow about 3 or 4 times with their nose to the floor and then push the fruit towards me as to indicate it's for you. And I had that much fruit that I didn't know what to do with it. I used to send out to the other wards, to the Japanese people that was ill in hospital. But however, I was around nearly 12 months in Hakodate, and I only had the suit of clothes, and I was wearing that every day. And when the 12 months was over, it was worn threadbare. So one day the Japanese doctor sends for me to go to his office. And I goes down, and there was another Japanese old chappie, a tailor I believe he was, because he was measuring me up and down and across my shoulders and down to my toes and measuring. So I asked the doctor, what's he doing? He said, he's measuring you for a new suit of clothes. So he told me I could go back again and report to his office about a week later, just before I went to Yokohama. And I reported back to the doctor's office, and there was the old tailor there with a big cardboard box. And he took the lid off, and it was full of clothes. And he started to unpack the clothes. The doctor passed them on to me. I had to strip myself there what I wore. They gave me new woolen singlet, new short, new underpants, new socks, new shoes, and new hat, and everything new. And I said, what do I do with my old clothes? Well, he said, you can please yourself. What you do with them, you can take them if you like. But I says to the doctor, who pays for all these? Because I only had 7 pounds of English money to collect when I left that ship, and I couldn't claim the money unless I was back in a British port, either in London or in Antwerp, where I joined the ship in the first place. So I said to the doctor, I have no money, and who's going to pay for it? Well, he said quietly to me, we are living in hopes that the British consul will pay for it, but if he wouldn't, the Lord will. Well, I thought that was great. And you remember probably the last war, when we were fighting here against the Japanese. They reckoned that the Japanese was hiding behind some trees or everywhere, and as soon as you moved, they cut your throat as quick as you look at. But I can vouch quite the reverse. While I was in Japan, I never met a better lot of people than I did in Japan. And eventually I was put on another ship again that run down to Yokohama. That's a big seaport. And I was told by the British consul when I arrived in Yokohama, there was a building with a dome roof that you could see from the wharf. Yokohama looks something like something similar to Wellington. The town is on a hillside, and foreshore is all flat. There were several buildings with dome roofs and several 6- and 7-story buildings. But I knew which way to go where the town was. But I asked one of these Japanese people in Japanese, one of the wharfies, where the British consul was. And he showed me, pointed out with his finger and told me in Japanese where it was. And as soon as he opened his mouth, I understood him quite clear, but it sounded a different dialect, something like the Scotchman to Cockney, or when you go down to Devonshire, the Cornish, they're singing. And away up in Lancashire, they're talking the same language, but a different dialect. And the same thing happened in Japan. I eventually found the British consul in Yokohama, went in there, and they sent for a rickshaw and took me to a hospital. But the hospital was totally different. It was English style. There was beds in the hospital, and there was tables and chairs to sit on. And the matron spoke clear English, and the nurses, they didn't. But the matron and one or two European nurses that spoke English. And I had to wait there for about 3 or 4 weeks before these Borneo sailed for England. And it was one fine day when I left Yokohama. I went on the ship, and then in the harbor there was not many ships alongside. They were all tied up on buoys, a big harbor. And in the harbor there was a beautiful British destroyer with very tall masts and crow's nests away up there. And I was leaning on the rail on the Borneo, admiring that ship. It was painted white. And I asked one of the stewards on the English ship, what ship was that? Oh, he says, that's a British destroyer visiting Japan. And I said, by Joe, doesn't she look nice? Yes, he said. Anyway, that evening we left Yokohama, and next we were going to Kobe. Kobe is another big seaport in Japan. And we took all night to go to from the inland sea, where Yokohama is situated on, out into the ocean, and then round some islands or somewhere to go to Kobe. And Kobe was another place on a hillside, and the hill was covered with bush, and away up in the bush was a big ship's anchor carved in. So you could see from the sea a great big anchor. And I asked some of the sailors what it was, and they said that's a bush cut down in the shape of a anchor, the stock and the pair of flukes and that bar that goes near the top, through everything that was cut out, cleared the scrub, and all around the rest was all green scrub. So that was all right. Well, about breakfast time, we got rather early in Kobe, and about breakfast time I seen a wreck of a ship not far from our ship tied up. The masts was bent very near down to the foredeck. And I asked one of the sailors, what is that wreck? And he said to me, you remember seeing that beautiful British destroyer in Yokohama yesterday? That's it. And we left Yokohama in the evening, and it took us all night and next day, all day to go to Kobe. And that destroyer left about 12 hours after, and he struck a typhoon, and that's what happened. We nearly sunk him. So that's how good it was. Japan is something similar like New Zealand for gales of wind coming up from nowhere and blow you out of the sea or off the shore. So anyway, with the Borneo, I went back she was bound back to London. And from Kobe, we went to Moji, that's in Japan. From Moji to another place, I forget the name of it. And from there we went to Formosa, which is Taipei just now. That used to be a Formosa island, and it was owned by the Japanese then. We took some cargo and some passengers in Formosa, and then we went to Burma. We took some cargo boxes with gum trees in to take to Europe. You know what they take the milk out to make raw rubber out. And then from Burma we went to another place and into Shanghai and Singapore and Hong Kong and Calcutta, and all the coast round there. It was all East Indies, and it was all owned by Britain. It was all carrying British flag. And at every port where we pulled up, there was a tugboat coming alongside and taking the passengers ashore. If the ship stayed there for a day, you could go ashore from breakfast till dinner time, come back dinner time, have your dinner, and go ashore again after. But about a couple of hours before the ship left, you always give about 3 very sharp, strong blasts of the ship's siren. That was the signal for all hands to come back aboard. And these here little tugboats, ferry boats, they were playing every hour in some place, going ashore and coming back, going ashore, and all free of charge. You could go ashore, stay as long as you like, and come back aboard again. And so we went right back along the coast, and we called even on the way back in Ceylon. They call it Ceylonka now. The capital of Ceylon was Colombo. I don't know what they call the capital now, but the island, they call it Ceylonka. And from there on, we didn't go through the Suez Canal because the ship was too big. We went around along the African coast into the across the Bay of Biscay into English Channel, and we landed in London.